Oh my goodness. Welcome back to an episode. If you tuned in last week, it was the 1 year commemoration of this podcast being birthed. And I brought back my very first guest from a year ago who helped me get this whole thing going. And so, guess who we're bringing back this week? We're bringing back the second guest. So, we're commemorating the 1 year in 1 week right now. Birth of the podcast with none other than Julie Brumley, my good friend. She's been my mentor. She's my sidekick, my partner in business, a member of my team. She's the Root to Rise client support coach. Everyone who gets to be in her world is grateful. So if you're listening right now, you're just a lucky duck to get to hear from Julie today. And she is the most repeat guest, just thinking of it now, on the podcast. I've never had somebody back 3 times. But it just feels so appropriate, and there's no one else I would want to have come back this week than you a whole year later. And before I gush too much about you, I want to introduce you or welcome you to the podcast and just say, hey, how you doing, Julie?
Hey Bex. I am good. I'm in a whole new stage of life right now, and it's so cool to be able to share it with you. So it's really fun.
So, for those who don't know our history, Julie and I first met through her niece, Sarah. Sarah and I were best friends in Seattle. We've been connected through the same sisterhood of churches over the years. But I met Julie, how long ago was that? Like,
It was about 10 years ago, actually. Maybe a little bit less, but almost that. Yeah.
so crazy. So I met you, I think, first at her wedding, but then I moved to Virginia and was in the same church as you, and you're the only person I recognized. And I remember you like running over the seats or pews or, whatever you call them, like leaping and bounding like a golden retriever, like and I was like, oh my gosh, what a warm welcome. It helped me because I was nervous and new, right, to this big group of people. But from the jump, I just saw this open spirit, excitement for getting to know me. And that's when me and Sebastian were going through a very rough time transitioning from Seattle to Virginia, having our first baby. That's when stuff really started to
Yeah.
decline, hit the fan. And when I learned that you led a group within the church of codependency recovery and addiction, I was like, how do I sign up? And at the time, I was like, Sebastian, we have to do this. And that was very much in our chase run phase, my anxious attachment, his avoidant, where he was like, F that. Like, I'm not doing that group.
Yeah.
But he did end up joining, a year and a half later after I
Yep.
started. So,
Mhm.
anyway, that's the history. Julie has been there for me through some of the darkest valleys of my life. She's been there for us, Sebastian and I, through some of our, like, literally the worst moments in our whole marriage. It was Julie house that we went to the day that we had a pretty big, traumatic implosion, broken vows, broken trust in our marriage. And Julie was where we went to. So she's seen us at our worst. She's seen us and probably been shocked. I mean, all of us were shocked to see how we made it out and are now where we're at in our marriage and just life in general. But you've been meant to be a part of my path, and it's been amazing to see how we've continued to find each other.
Yeah. I would totally agree. It's been really interesting to kind of if anybody were to have been like a fly on a wall and seen the different like valleys and mountains that we've been in together, it would be fascinating. I mean, it could be a what do you call it, an after school special or something. I mean, there's just been so much that we've navigated together, and I think even this newest version of us that started, I think, just 2.5 years ago, really, when you started your business, I Do Breakthrough, in the Root to Rise program, me being your last beta student. And I just remember feeling this, honestly, this immense feeling of embarrassment and almost like, am I a full on imposter that here I am helping all these women with codependency and addictive behaviors, and I can't seem to get my life in order? And at least that's what it felt like. And when I started seeing your stuff on social media, and you live literally 15 minutes from me, and we hadn't seen each other in a bit. but when I started seeing it, I realized this has been missing, I think. And it is so interesting to me that the right word is metamorphosis that has occurred in the last 2 years in my life, just from adding the somatic component. And that was the piece that when we were together, and I've said this so many times, you're probably sick of hearing it, but when we were together, I remember it was in this house that I'm currently in, because you came to group in two different houses. There was one in Reston and then one where I am currently. And I just remember sitting with you guys in my unremodeled living room and realizing, like, felt like scales came off my eyes. And I was like, there's a missing piece. And I have no idea what it is, but I can guarantee you once I figure it out, I'm going to share it with you. And then what's so interesting is just a few short years later, I feel like you stumbled upon it. And, but I was so unbelievably afraid. And you remember that first call. I think you were afraid.
We both were. Oh yeah.
So just because of the interesting relationship, the dynamic was switching, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it was very humbling. There was a lot of imposter syndrome within me, I think I already said. And so, but to be able to see how much just adding some simple somatic work to my life, applied somatics, things that I do on a daily basis, has shifted everything about what I do. And I've added it into all of the things that I do now, just because of your influence on me. And I think that's huge. And then being able to work with you. I mean, that's a whole other thing. And I think we knew pretty soon on, gosh, I think I'd been in the program 6 months and we actually started to have a conversation about it. It might've even been less than that. So, and that's been an absolute joy. So,
yeah, I'd be lying if I, said I didn't have it in my head from our very first call, right? When you're looking into the program, I'm like, first of all, this feels so role reversal. And both of us were like, what is this? We don't know what's happening. And then I was like, what if God is doing this to have her go through whatever she needs to go through? And then she ends up being a coach in this program one day. How wild. And then look what's happened. And what, especially this past year, we talked about abandonment a year ago when we launched this podcast. And to look back on what has taken place in us individually, in our lives, in our businesses, in our parenting, it's wild. Way too much to pack into a 20 minutes left of this podcast. But
yeah.
But, that's what you really came in to heal with abandonment wound. Mm-hmm. And so I would love to define it. First of all, I know that word alone, so many people resonate with when they just hear the abandonment wound, but many are like, but what exactly is that? I think I resonate. I don't know. How would you define it?
Well, it's different. It's different for each person depending upon the kind of trauma that they've experienced, but the root of it has to usually do with just a consistent being left, a consistent being given up, if you will. Now, from my history as an adoptee, not everybody is going to resonate with my version of abandonment, but for me, it started before I was even born. It was all of the things that my birth mother did, two of those being attempting to abort me twice, which that story. And so I think it started really young for me, but I think the abandonment wound defined is just anything that is consistently being this feeling of rejection and loss. And that can happen in relationship, that can happen in a job, that can happen this is going to sound really funny, with a pet. It can happen with pretty much anything. But I think it's recognizing how it's impacted us and then how we've carried it into our relationships. Because usually what ends up happening, and the reason people notice this wound, is after repetition of negative patterns in relationships, meaning people pleasing, or there's gaslighting in a relationship because they're trying so desperately to hold on. And so they shut themselves down. And that's where self-abandoning comes in. It's not listening to your own voice, not listening to your own body. So I think that's usually when it shows up for people, is like, what is happening? Like, why am I responding this way in relationships? And that's when they begin to question and figure out that there's this pattern of people leaving them, whether it's in friendship or marriage or whatever that may be. And they're so desperately trying to hold on. Does that make
And not
sense?
and not always physically leaving, but can be emotionally leaving. Like, right, you
Right.
could be in the same house with somebody, but feel like a total emotional neglect, whether that be your parents growing up or your spouse, even your children. You can feel abandoned by your own children. I just looked up the definition, and this is so dumb. Like what dictionary.com comes up with sometimes. It's like abandonment, the action or fact of abandoning or being abandoned. Like, thanks. That's really helpful. So I looked up another one, and this is a little better. An act or instance of leaving a person or thing permanently and completely.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you were alluding to. Sometimes it's
Right.
the little t trauma, the death by a thousand paper cuts, just over the years and over the days, over time, this being a continual pattern. And sometimes it is like my dad, right? Where it was just
Right.
out of nowhere, suddenly passed away. That was not, that was more big T, right?
Mm-hmm.
In an instant. So you bring up kind of two facets. There's the abandonment that, people can abandon us, right? But then there is the self abandonment. And it's interesting because when you and I went to Georgia a couple weeks ago, now I
Mm-hmm.
had a conversation with somebody that night at that dinner, and she was on reality TV. And I asked her, of all of the trauma that you went through, what was the hardest thing? And I expected it to be like the hate on social media or production twisting her, love story, blah, blah, blah. And she thought about it for a second, and she was like, I would have to say it was the self abandonment. It was the not, it was the not living in a way that was honoring to really who she was and her values, leaving herself. So I'm curious because, the women we work with in the program too, they have a lot of trauma that they come
Yep.
in with. They have every reason to stay in victim mode and blame everyone and everything that has happened to them
Mm-hmm.
in their life. And it amazes both of us to see how much they take ownership and step back into power. But also, when we uncover all of the obvious kind of things that have been done against them, I don't know if you find this, but I feel like everyone at their core, really the most painful thing they go through is the way that they have self abandoned.
Yeah, I would agree. But I think it's uncovering that. So even when we talked a year ago, we talked about the abandonment wound, but I would have to go back and listen. I don't know if I talked about self-abandonment yet.
Mm-mm,
I don't think I was
we
kind of
didn't.
at that place yet. Yeah. And I think I realized it about a year later when we actually recorded the second podcast, which I think is really funny that there was that piece. So it's a gradual uncovering of recognizing, how do we speak to ourselves? How do we treat ourselves in these instances where we are feeling, like you talked about, the emotional detachment maybe from a partner, or the lack of empathy that a relationship is supposed to provide? I mean, I've heard those words before, like, I have no more empathy left for you. When that happens, when you hear those words, like for me, what ended up happening is I shut down, immediately went into the shame spiral for about a month. And if anybody knows what that feels like, raise your hand. Just kidding, we're not in a group, but that's what we do, right? We ask them to try to feel that community. We all collapse, we cry, we do our own thing. And I think for me, it was identifying, okay, what's happening physically for me? I just started your program when all of this happened, and I remember thinking, my body completely shuts down and I don't have the ability to process anything. And then in those moments, because I'm not allowing myself, like, I'm literally in flop, right? Like, of all of the different states, I'm in flop. I don't even know how to get out of here.
So
And
pause
that,
there, Julie, for a
yeah,
second. Can you define flop for those who are wondering?
yes, I totally can. So there's many different trauma states, or fight, flight, fawn, freeze, but flop is a new one that hasn't been talked about as much. And it's basically being stuck, being numb, not being very depressed, not knowing what to do next, can't get out of bed. Um, I think that's basically the best way to
Mm-hmm.
describe it. And you can probably describe it too, because I know you've been through it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And being in that place for that month, and allowing the shame to do its thing, I completely abandoned myself. But I didn't see that until much later, looking back and realizing, wow, like everything that I had involved in that moment when I heard those words of, I have no more empathy left for you, had to do with how the other person viewed me. It didn't have anything to do with my relationship with myself. And once I realized, it's not my fault. I didn't do all of this. There's two people in this relationship. And so I had to begin to look at, what is it that I actually need? And that self-abandoning for me looked like people pleasing. The whole chase and run idea that you talked about. I would chase, he would run. It looked a lot like, oh gosh, right now I can't remember the different words that came to my mind. But the biggest thing was me running away from the emotions that were within me and not allowing myself to vocalize them, or not allowing myself to feel them. And that's where the flop even becomes more prominent, is when we hold those emotions within us and don't allow ourselves to release them. Because in my experience, feelings are in the brain. They're more thinking focused, whereas emotions are more energy focused. And so whenever there's a thought that goes through our head, we definitely have a feeling that's attached to it, but it's just information. Our body resonates whatever that is. And until we are able to access what that is, we self-abandon and we go with what our thoughts are telling us to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I just was trying to think of, okay, what did it look like practically for me? I can relate to everything you said. And then I would just add ways that I self abandoned were hustling like a mad woman, hustling like crazy at the expense of my peace, at the expense of my actual physical health. I was, gosh, it was eczema breakdowns, it was
Yeah.
anxiety attacks, it was insomnia. So at the expense of that, at the expense of my family, for sure, not being able to be present for my kids and even with Sebastian. And those are all things that I valued. But here I am. It was essentially running away from the emotions that were in me. That was how I self abandoned, and running towards work, which felt really good because I was having people clap for me and say, "You're doing such a good job at this," and giving me prizes and promotions and blah, blah, blah. But that was really just me in, you named the nervous system states, right? That was me in a freeze survival response. I was in survival mode, but it was like this frozen, like I just am going, I'm going, going. And then the other, yeah, people pleasing for sure, abandoning what I really thought about stuff, what I really wanted, even on micro levels. Like, hey, do you want to go to this restaurant? And like, oh, whatever you want, just want to keep the peace. Don't want to share an opinion in case it cuts off, your adoration for me. So micro levels and big levels, there's so many ways that we can self-abandon. Drinking like crazy through the pandemic is another one that I think of, just running away from sitting with myself, taking a seat with myself. I'd rather drink and numb out the emotions. So there's no shame in the game, right? There's no shame for any of that. That's what we had to do for a time to survive, but it gets to a place in all of us, you, me, all the women that we speak with every day, where it's like, this has reached its expiration date and I'm so far away from me and I don't even know what I want or like or who I am anymore. And that feels really stinking terrible.
It totally does. Like some of the things you were just talking about brought back what I was trying to say earlier, but it just kind of felt stopped for some reason. But it was the whole idea of pushing through. Like for me, that I just push through. I'll make it. I'll just push through one more thing. I'll be fine. But the problem was, every time I pushed through, there was the next thing, because I hadn't dealt with whatever I was pushing through. And then within all of that, there was the self-abandonment of what my body was trying to tell me. Like I would say yes to things when my body was saying, hell no. And I think that was the piece that I learned in your program, was my body is telling me something, stop abandoning it and listening to what it is saying, because it's been something that I've fostered, navigated, developed, is that really close relationship with our intuition, which comes from within us. It's being able to notice when something just doesn't feel right for me. And instead of being like, I have to push through that and say yes, even though I don't want to, it's being able to go, no, my body's making it very clear what it wants right now. And what that may feel like, to give an example of that, would be recently there was something that was presented to me as an opportunity. And inside of me, what ended up the whole time, whenever I heard of this opportunity, all I could think of was, I really don't want to do that. I don't have any desire. My whole body, like literally, like if you could describe it, I kind of did this, and so your shoulders roll in. It was kind of like my whole countenance felt down whenever I thought about it. And we were talking about it, you had heard me talking about it, and you had kept trying to tell me you need to listen to that. And I just kept thinking, well, no, this is what I need. This is what everybody's telling me I need to do. I need to do it. Well, that's me trying to push through. That is that voice, that negative voice telling me, if you don't do this, then ... So what ended up happening is I made a decision. No, I'm not going to do this. My body is telling me no, and I can tell a difference. And as soon as I made that decision, it was like, I totally felt more expansive. I felt like, okay, I'm not going to say yes to something when my body is clearly telling me no. And so it was this very empowering thing for me to be able to do. And then, of course, I heard some wonderful encouragement from my friends. And we all need that community around us to tell us, yes, you did exactly what you needed to do by listening to yourself. But we don't allow ourselves to go there. A lot of times we just still push through without even including other people in our process, because we just think this is what we have to do. So
I love that example so much. Yeah. I think that's spot on relatable for a lot of women, just your intuition, right? Which some women may feel like, I have a strong connection to my intuition, but trusting it is another story. And then others might be like, no, I don't even know what my intuition sounds like, feels like. I just have a corroded relationship with my intuition. And that's one of the most exciting and empowering things that you and I have learned, right, through somatic work, is just clearing out some trauma from your body really helps you be able to tune in and hear that quiet whisper of the direction in which we should go in whatever area of life it's in. But now I can see in retrospect how blaringly off I was in that area and how my intuition was screaming at different points. I remember one time Sebastian was headed out to some concert, and I just, like, my whole body was feeling, gosh, this rock in my stomach. Like, I just felt extremely anxious. Like, I couldn't even put logic as to why, but I just felt off about it. And I remember asking details about this concert he was going to, and he brushed it off as like nothing weird, no big deal. And so in that moment, instead of trusting my intuition, being like, no, like, I don't believe you when you're talking to me and telling me this, something feels off, instead I self-abandoned and I went to the script of, I must be crazy, I am dramatic, I am insecure, I'm overthinking like normal, and I start to gaslight myself. And so those moments, honestly, were some of the most painful moments for me in retrospect. Like, how come I didn't trust myself? And I had to work through dissolving a lot of shame because, one, no one ever taught me. How am I supposed to know something that I've never been taught or mirrored to me? And two, I realized that a lot of the relationships I had been in over the years and just different circles that I ran in, different communities, really didn't really value empowering people to, or me in those circumstances, to learn how to trust my intuition. And so, but anyway, all of that to say, that was like a huge door open to us being able to do the opposite of self-abandon, which I'm curious, what would you call the opposite of self-abandonment?
Self-love.
Self-love.
Yeah, without question. But that's a process. So for me to be able to get to the other side of self-abandonment, I had to increase my self-awareness. I had to know what's going on in my brain at the time that I do the collapsing, what is going on, to physically know what happens in my body. I never would have been able to notice that because I didn't first of all, I didn't think I needed to care about it. Nobody had ever talked to me about it. This is what's crazy to me, Becky. I have my stinking master's degree in counseling. Okay. I went to school for 6 years for counseling with a specialty in addictions and recovery. Not once did they have any somatic training. They talked about it. I knew what somatic was. I knew it meant the body, but there was no like, here, understand what happens in your body. And that to me is mind blowing. But anyway, I had to throw that in there because I just think that's crazy. I think things have shifted now a little bit, even with the direction that we're all going in the world. But I will say it started with self-awareness for me. And then it moved into self-acceptance, which had to do with, okay, I'm just going to accept where I am and love myself there. What does that look like? Well, that looks like showing myself compassion. So in the moment when something happens and I feel triggered and I immediately want to go to that negativity that you just described and I described as, you're an idiot. Why are you even here? Why do you keep doing this? You're crazy. Those thoughts, I had to be able to say to myself, no, it makes sense that you're feeling these feelings, and accept myself in that place, and then show myself compassion by, for me, this was my go-to, hand over heart, which I know it was yours too. I had to attune to whatever was going on with me. And it turned into kind of a daily practice. Whenever I felt something in my body, I started paying attention to whatever that was. When I was really going through it and trying to resolve some things in one of my really closest relationships, it used to be these three fingers on my third eye. This is the center where intuition lives. Yeah, I would literally do that. And I would do it a lot. And I would just sit there and pay attention. And what was so cool as I did that and showed my body compassion is I started to be able to take responsibility for whatever it was that was going on. I could name things now. I could say, ooh, I'm feeling this. And let me allow that emotion to move through me, because I don't want this anger to sit here forever, because that now I know that has frequency. And so figuring that out, this energy within my body allowed this transformation to occur where I was able to go, I actually do love myself. I'm pretty amazing. Look at how I just navigated that. I never would have done that before. And that's where this whole idea of self-belonging, which is like my life's work, I think, but this whole idea came to me, is like, belonging doesn't have to do with anybody. Nobody. It doesn't have to do with anybody outside of me. It is within me. And it has to do with my relationship with God, that is very, very, very important to me, but also my relationship with myself. And so that was the process that I had to go through to do the opposite of abandoning myself.
I love that. So self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-belonging / self-love.
No, it's self-awareness, self-acceptance, then compassion, self-compassion, then self-responsibility. That was me identifying the data that was popping around in my head. Like, I got it. I see it. I see you. I'm acknowledging you. And then 5 after self-responsibility is self-transformation. That was when I realized there's energy bouncing around in my body that I need to release. And you helped me with that. That was the whole do the attention to your body from the time that you wake up to the time that you go to bed. When I started doing that and releasing the energy, that's when self-love kicked in. That's when I was able to really see, oh my gosh, my body has carried this all along and has protected me and loved me through it. And I just haven't seen it. And that's how I began to realize I belong to me. I don't need a birth parent or a spouse or a child to accept me. I need to accept me and know that I'm accepted by God, for me, my higher power, the divine, however you see it. And once I figured that out, I'm not saying I've arrived. I'm still obviously working on this. That just was this huge like light bulb moment for me. Like, it's within me. It's not from other people. And for the longest time, that's why I self-abandoned, is because I was looking for it in relationship with others, not with myself.
So powerful, Julie. And I think it's what everyone knows on paper, right? Intellectually, like, I know I got to love myself, self-love, but seeing you be able to take that from just an intellectual idea to embodying it in your nervous system and your actual somatic experience, like, that really has been amazing just to watch and has been the game changer for me too, as you know. So I'm not going to let you off the hook today before I ask you to share a little bit about what's going on new in your own life. Because when you even just said a second ago, I think this is my life's work, like, duh, you think? So I know you've been making moves in silence behind the scenes and you have something coming up. So please share all the details now. I would love to hear.
Okay, well, this is going to air after one of my first big things is going to happen, but it'll be available on replay. So I'm next week, Wednesday, which will be 2 days before this actually airs. I am doing my first ever masterclass called Healing the Abandonment Womb, the Power of Self-Belonging. So I'll be doing that, which will be really great. But all the work that I'm really trying to do, and the crazy thing is, I am an adoptee, so I have this passion to work with adoptees. I just do after everything that I've been through in the last 3 years and the things that I've discovered about myself. Once being in reunion with my birth family, but then just also living my life in that reunion, figuring out how, because originally that was where I got my belonging when I first found it. It was like, oh, now I've found it. I had to realize, no, it was within me. And so it pushed me about a year ago to feel this drive. As a matter of fact, I remember calling you once this happened. This idea birthed within me, and I got these chills all over my body. Like, I think I need to create a coaching business that helps adoptees. And you were like, oh my gosh, yes. And that's when it began. And I think since then, it has been just kind of ruminating in my brain. And over the last few months, I've been creating with my amazing business coach, Audrey. She's amazing. Everybody should use her. But anyway, so she's been helping me kind of put together everything that's in my brain into an actual coaching program. And so that is going to launch the end of April, and it's called Reborn, Emerge from the Fog. And it's a 7-week program where it actually goes through those 7 phases I just described to you on kind of like a surface level, to give those adoptees that are just beginning to recognize how their adoption has impacted their life. Because it took a bit for me. I needed some time to kind of, that's why it says emerge from the fog, come out of this fog of realizing my adoption has impacted me my entire life and I didn't know. And so there's this loss that you realize, I've lost so many years because of that, and learning how to nurture yourself in the process through the 7-phase program that I have created. So that 7-week program, I think the date that we are planning on starting it is April 22nd, but I'll figure it out and we can make sure it's put in the show notes. But I'm very, very excited about that and how it's going to progress moving forward.
I'm beyond excited too. And like I was voice memoing you earlier today, I just feel like this is what so many people have been waiting for. And it just gives me chills all over my body to think about your whole life progression, starting with the deep trauma that so little can say they've had a trauma that early. I mean, pre birth, right? From the womb, attempted abortion twice. Your personality and your character now is such a testament to that, that you're so resilient. Like you could have been knocked down so many times along your journey, and you're only getting stronger with every single, valley and every single blow that comes your way. And so I'm beyond excited to see who is meant for you, who ends up coming into your world on this close level. I know every woman in our program who's had the privilege of getting to learn from you, be guided by you, just raves and is better off for it. So yeah, it was interesting yesterday. Just I couldn't help but share your masterclass. I'm like, people need to know about this. And immediately, right? It was like 11 responses. Send me the link, send me the link, send me the link, and counting. I haven't checked today, but so many people, when they hear that phrase alone, self-abandonment, right? Self-belonging. It's like, I don't know if I know exactly what that is, but that resonates deeply and I need to be there. So, guys, if this resonates with you, check out the show notes. You can find Julie in the links that I send you. And is there anything else, Julie, that you want to share before we hop off here?
Well, there is one thing that I think would be really, really helpful, even in relation to what we talked about kind of in the middle when we were talking about ego versus intuition. I have that I repurposed, I made a post on Instagram a while ago that we have used so much in our group coaching container, but I've changed it into more of a journal prompting slide thing that is available as well. And I just wanted to highlight that only because I feel like for anyone in life who makes decisions, that's everybody. It's really great to have a tool to be able to do that when you're really wrestling, because when those negative voices that live kind of in our ego, and there's good parts about our ego, don't get me wrong, there is. But when those negative voices live there, it's hard to hear our intuition. And so there's a freebie that will be as well linked that I just wanted to kind of highlight because it's something that has really helped me in this process of getting to know my inner voice. So I just wanted to highlight that too.
I'm so glad you did. I use that thing all the time, and so do our clients. So, Julie, I love you so much. This was so fun to just reflect with you. And yeah, guys, we hope this deposits something real and resonant into your journey wherever you're at this week. We love you. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.